1 second.
I'm good. Good.
Hello. Okay. Good evening. You're good, right, Jamie? Good evening, 7:30. Today is Wednesday, October 9th. We're going to go special meeting, then we're going to go into our work session. We're going to start with the pledge.
Yes.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All righty.
Okay. Trustee Kazada,
Present.
trustee White,
Present.
trustee Fritchie,
Present.
and Mayor Levin.
Present.
Thank you. There's one resolution on this evening for the special meeting. It's authorization to advertise for bids, contract DPW 24-02, excavation services in connection with replacement of lead service lines along Spring Street. Resolved that subject to review by Corporation Council, the village clerk is authorized to advertise for bids for contract DPW 24-02, excavation services in connection with replacement of lead service lines along Spring Streets, such bids to be returnable to the village clerk. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Second. Any comments? Stuart?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. I have a motion to adjourn the special session and to go into work session.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. We're now in work session.
Okay. All right, let's just see if there's first any announcements. I'm going to start on my left. Gentlemen, everybody's good? Dana, do you have any announcement?
Yeah, I
believe you
just
do.
wanted to say that last week regarding the new planters downtown, I thanked everybody on the placement committee, but I neglected to thank the parks guys who helped us so much to put them in and worked with us so patiently and helpfully and happily, and especially Miguel, who, when we had to go buy more plants, we went and bought more plants. And they were just really great. So I wanted to give a shout out to those guys. That's it.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I thought you were going to mention just a shout out to the haunted kill, just,
Yeah, there's,
oops.
it's the 18th, which is like a week from Friday, I
Yeah.
think. Oh my gosh. So it's free, but you do have to sign up for a time for one of the tours of the Trail of Terror. So that link can be found on the Facebook page.
The village.
On the village Facebook page, you can find the link and you just have to sign up for a time. Thanks.
Very good. Earlier today, village manager, Jamie Hoffman, Maddie Sahaj as well. And I don't know, 25 or so people representing the state, a number of consultants, representatives from the Congressman Lawler's office, Dana Levenberg was there, Sleepy Hollow was represented, Croton, all came together in the middle of our town, right near the planters, and our new, sort of new belly, big belly garbage cans, everything in one place. By the 5 corners, but to really promote and do the ribbon cutting for the e-bikes. And I gave my paper away, but I put in the mail message, out of the 50 communities that are involved, not in this project, but with the vendor for those e-bikes, apparently we're the #1 in early adapters to the e-bikes. We've had the biggest show of usage for them, rides, miles, and in my mayor's message, we will also be apparently printing up how many calories have been lost by individuals, thanks to Jamie Hoffman's analysis, but the metrics are that people are really using them, predominantly at the commuter station, at the commuter station, and I think the next one was Arcadian shopping. I don't remember the third. 95% people that responded to survey of satisfaction, 95% really like it. Wow, when I'm not on this microphone, can't hear me at all. Really crazy. So super excited about it. The other communities are super excited. I think I know News 12 was there because this is really a project about lowering emissions in the communities, figuring out a safe way to use bikes instead of cars. And there's a real piece, there's employment. A couple of people are getting employed from this. 3 of our nonprofits are involved in the rollout so that this reaches all members of our community. Now, not just those that happily read my mayor message, but those that also really don't and may not have the same access to information that we hope they will in the future. But right now, we're hoping to use some of our colleagues at the nonprofits to be more helpful. I mentioned the employment opportunity. This will be part of the multimodal parking. There'll be an electrification piece to it there. So all good news so far. Obviously, it's a big challenge to ride bikes in the Northeast with the weather and in topographies like river towns throughout New York State. But Ithaca is also doing something similar with something similar to us. So we'll hopefully over time get better and better at it. But so far the response has been really, really good. So and Dana Levenberg did ride the bike with her new helmet on. We are going to have some sort of program of educating people on riding the bikes properly, et cetera, et cetera. So we're very excited about that. And looking forward to all the wonderful Halloween programs for kids, adults, families, et cetera, that really run throughout this part of the country, from Sleepy Hollow and Tarrytown and Irvington to Croton to Ossining, et cetera, et cetera. So be on the lookout for that. We're gonna go right into the meeting. Oh, I will say as well a big happy birthday to Maddie Sahaj. She hates it, so even more reason. No, always last week it was so Stuart became, congratulating being grandparent. This is like real life stuff. We like this sort of stuff. Okay, ready to go with the more serious business on hand.
Good evening, everyone. Happy birthday, Maddie. We have an update tonight on overnight hardship parking. And this is something we have talked about and been talking about for quite some time. And we do recognize that our process needs improvement, and we've been working on that. Tonight's discussion is really looking at the things that we can do internally to facilitate a more seamless and effective process. Probably not the last discussion we'll have on the topic, but certainly one of many. But we do want to start moving in the direction by bringing the board up to speed with what we've talked about internally, getting direction from the board on moving ahead, and then ultimately, I think, getting a much, much better handle on the overnight hardship parking situation in the village, being able to implement it more effectively and make sure that people who need the parking near their residences, where they don't have off-street parking, are able to get it. So with that, I would like to I think first turn it over to Maddie, and I'm sure Stuart will weigh in as well.
Right, thank you. Good evening, everybody. So are you able to screen share? I think we prepared 2 documents for the board. And so I think, it's not as jazzy as my usual presentations, where we can go through like a cool PowerPoint or Prezi. This is really still in memo format, and that's sort of by design. This is a topic that the board is currently comprised, but I'm sure for those of you who've been sitting here for a little while, this is something that's come up again and again and again and again. While it's a point of great frustration for many of our residents, and I'm sure you all hear about this on a regular basis, unfortunately, there's no silver bullet here. This is a really, really, really complicated problem that we're endeavoring to solve. And a complicated problem has a multi-pronged solution. As the manager mentioned, we think that this is basically a collection of the ideas that have been put forth by all of the affected departments, besides just the manager's office and corporation council. Finance touches this, the clerk's office touches this, the building department touches this, the police department touches this, DPW touches this. It's probably the one thing we do in the village, aside from the budget, that has the most departments involved in the process. So thanks to a lot of contributions from people in all of those departments over the last probably year and a half, we've been able to make some headway. So this is just really a chance to sort of let you know what we've done thus far, what we're recommending as maybe some interim steps administratively, and then some other things that the board may want to explore for longer term. We're really at this time only working on the demand side. Obviously, the biggest issue with hardship parking permits, which for those who are unfamiliar, New York state law says that you're not allowed to park on, Paul might be able to help me with this. You're not allowed to park on a road in New York State between 3 and 6 a.m. unless you have a hardship exemption, which is why we have this program. The word hardship's doing a lot of heavy lifting in the village of Ossining. The way that it's put in the code is perhaps not as helpful as it could be, which is one thing that we're asking for the board's support and sort of recreating that definition. But certainly, you know, the supply element of it is something that's rather fixed. We don't have, you know, municipal lots scattered around all of our neighborhoods, just a couple. We're seeing a very high concentration of need for on-street parking in some neighborhoods, less so in others, but there's only so many streets that we're able to allow folks to park on. So like I said, it's a multifaceted issue that's going to require you know, at the very least, a demand side intervention, but possibly in the future supply side. But we're going to start on the demand side because that's a little bit less painful. So going through the memo.
Can I ask a quick
Yeah,
clarifying question? When you say supply and demand side, supply side is the giving or the granting of these hardship exemptions. Is that right?
Well, so that's not quite how I mean it.
See, that's
Yeah.
why I clarified.
Okay, no, good
It's not for
question.
me, I get it. But
Yeah,
for the
yeah,
folks at home.
Okay, so I'll go to the next little section first, because that's a good segue. So one of the things that we had talked about, I think it was earlier this year, that would be really helpful is looking through the code as currently exists and figuring out what is our inventory of spaces in the program right now, right? So DPW helpfully went through and they put together a great spreadsheet for us of how many overnight parking spaces exist in the village of Ossining. So there's all different sections in the schedule part of the code. Some are alternate sides, some are one side only. And then there are only 2 streets where you can park on both sides of the street all the time. And those streets, for those who are following along at home, are Geneva Road and Charter Circle. Those are the only 2. But so DPW put together this whole inventory. And so in the current program, we have 3,472 parking spaces. That number is a little bit of a, I don't want to say it's a misnomer, but that's not exactly accurate. Because like I said, in many places, you can only park on one side or the other at a given time. So take that number and pretty much divide it by 2, right? So doing all the math and tallying up all of DPW's great work, we're at just under 2,500 spots that we can use in any given night. But don't forget, those are scattered throughout the whole village. So it's not just in the areas where, you know, folks don't have driveways or that we have the peak concentration of people who want to park on the street. For example, Susquehanna Road, which we might all be familiar with in Indian Village, there's 30 parking spaces in that neighborhood. I don't know what that's getting us, because I think the vast majority, if not all of the homes in that neighborhood, have driveways. So to say that 30 out of the 2,500 is in that neighborhood, it just sort of goes to show that, you know, it's not maybe distributed in the same way that the demand is. So to your point, the demand is how many folks need, can apply for, are eligible for, and the supply is how many spaces are there on the streets in the program, and maybe at some point elsewhere that we may want to consider. But right now, we're just focusing on how do we qualify people into the program from the person side, but also from the property side. And those are 2 other elements that we have to sort of pull apart. Is a property eligible for overnight parking? And then is the individual person eligible based on their registration, their license? So there's a lot of elements here. So I really appreciate that clarifying question. That's helpful. Going back to the memo, we started off, well, what have we done so far? We've known this is an issue for a long time. So the first thing is we asked the board to adjust the fee schedule slightly. So it used to be that you paid $80 for your first car. And again, that's $80 for the year, $80 for the first car, and then $40 for each additional. We asked the board and the board said, okay, to update the fee schedule. So now it's $85 per car per year. It is still not covering our cost by half of what it takes to administer this program. But we want to make sure it's affordable. We want to make sure that price is not, you know, pricing people out of being able to park in their neighborhood. So I think that's probably where we'll stay for now. Most recently, the board adjusted the acceptable weight limit for non-commercial vehicles. So I think that was a week ago. Because we had gotten a couple pieces of feedback to Stuart, to the board, to the clerk's office, that some SUVs now far exceed 5,000 pounds. And why can't I get an overnight tag? I'm not using this commercially. So we brought it up to 8,000 pounds. The third bullet, as I was just explaining, we have now our inventory, which we had talked about doing in a number of ways. The estimate was further sharpened by the signage project that we worked on a little bit ago. So for example, I'm thinking of a few specific intersections where it's pretty obvious you don't want to park too far into the intersection for sight distance reasons, but folks, because they want to squeeze a car in, would maybe put their car in an unsafe place. We now have signage in those places, no parking here at a corner, which now has cut down on that 2,500 by a little bit, not by very much. So we have fewer than 2,000 applications annually. So we have 2,500 spaces on a given night, 2,000 applications, but people are still telling us that they have no place to park. So it sort of goes back to my original thesis. The spaces aren't where we need them necessarily. And there's not really a whole heck of a lot we can do about that. But just make sure that we're working on really qualifying the people and the properties to put them into that overall pool. And then the last element is the building department had an intern who worked with us to sort of understand from a real world perspective what's actually going on. So when an application comes in, what kind of documentation are we checking for? Who's doing the inspections? Where are the biggest proportion of these applications coming from? And something that we were able to uncover, which I think we still don't particularly have a solution for. There are a lot of condo and apartment complexes in the village of Ossining that are pretty centrally located that were built at a time that we didn't have a parking requirement. So now we have some place that maybe has 100 units and there's room for 100 cars. But if one unit has 3 cars, where are those folks supposed to go? So now they're pushing into the neighborhood, then the people who live in that neighborhood have no place to go, then they're pushing out farther. So it's just sort of exacerbating the issue. I know that we talked about this very early on in this process about, is there a mechanism for us to push those properties back to the planning board for site plan approval and say, you guys gotta like do something about this. As yet, I don't think we've been able to figure out a way to make that happen. So unfortunately, we do have a lot of overflow coming from properties like Portland Living and things like that, that then sort of bleed into the neighborhood where then those people get pushed into a different area. So.
You're right, Maddie. The problem from the planning end is they've got their planning board approval, which was based upon
Right.
what it was
The rules over
before.
time.
So, you know, unless there's some sort of change that we would have to enact, the board would have to enact, there's really not a basis for it to go back to the planning board. If they were to do major work on the property, obviously then it would go back. Or if they had to reconfigure their parking lot, you know, we had a property a few years back where they were doing that, and that forced them to go back to the planning board. But if it's just essentially remaining as is, generally, right now at least, we don't have a mechanism to bring them back unless, you know, there's a code change where we would
Thank
do
you.
that.
I appreciate it.
So can I pause for 1 second? So Stuart, help me understand this. And I know we passed a law in regards to having utilizing a permit for driveways. Refresh my memory. Does that fall under the multifamilies as well? Which I would assume they do.
Yes, in fact, we were having some discussions about that the past day or so. It would apply to anybody, any particular type
So
of driveway.
in that case, will that trigger on your perspective that they will have to go in front of the planning board to revise site plan? Sort of like a ticket, I don't want to say take advantage because that's not the right word, because I don't want to take advantage of that situation, but I think that opportunity to look into this and see if there's, again, and look, if I go to, it's like saying I got a variance for my house, and because I'm doing something else, now you're going to send me back to give another variance for my house. So it's sort of like, it's unfair to say that.
Right.
So I'm just trying to find a way to kind of help the situation that that you guys are experiencing, but at the same time, I want to be, you know, logistics, you know, that they had an approval already. So it'll be sort of an unfair situation as well.
I think if the application trustee were, let's call it a repaving of a driveway, where it's essentially you're just going to tear it up, but you're going to put a new driveway in, and you're making no other change, I'd be hard pressed to see that going back to the planning board. If, however, they're changing a configuration, they're changing a size, adding any, then the answer would be yes, because it would change what was previously approved. But I think simply a repaving, I'd have a tough time bringing that one back, because I think it doesn't change the actual size of the lot. But again, there's nothing that would prevent this board, if it saw fit, to include, for example, in a zoning code, a provision that if, with regard to particular parking or even into resolutions going on forward, that, every, particular period of time, I'm just thinking out loud, they might have to, come back to the planning board to see if in fact there is sufficient parking at that particular location, assuming that they can provide the parking in the first place. But right now, unless it's a change in number of spaces, configuration of spaces, handicap spaces, or anything like that, there's probably not a basis to bring them back. Or if they're making a change to the building, which might change parking counts, but otherwise, probably not, at least in the way our code's configured now.
Just on this topic of condos, and I would include co-ops, but let's stay with condos. In this real life analysis that was done, did any of the complexes have room to build more parking? Or was that not looked at?
I don't believe that was looked at as part of this. This is
So we
mainly
just don't know.
analysis of based what's coming in, and then the number of units that we know are in those particular properties, how many spaces we know exist now, and then another example I can give is then the apartments that then are sort of pushing back onto, is it Walden Road? Then those cars are pushing into the neighborhood where Linden is, and we know that that's another hot point. So it just sort of, it overflows an already exacerbated issue. I don't want to exaggerate how big this particular area of the problem is. It's a contributing factor, certainly. I don't think it's driving the shortage that folks are perceiving, but it is a piece of it that we've not yet really solved.
Okay, so I think just on a whiteboard or a virtual whiteboard, to look at condos and see if they're in co-ops and see if there's room to give them a window of 3 years where they must add, if they didn't have laws about, so you were able to build 100 condo units and just build whatever number of parking you felt as the builder belonged. There was no rule as to it has to be 2 for every unit or 1 for every unit or 1.5 or nothing.
I can't talk about the code before '09. The '09 code definitely has the numbers in it in terms of what it was, but.
Yeah, but a lot of
But we
those
could be talking
condos,
condos that preceded even the 1950 zoning code.
no, I mean, a lot of them were built in the 70s and 80s,
But
60s.
But even then,
also.
there may have been numbers, but the numbers may have been much lower than they are today.
Right,
So what you've got is they're basically consistent with that code, but they're not consistent.
right.
with
They're not
change.
breaking anything.
Right.
When they did it, they didn't break anything, but things have shifted. And people that live in those units, I was just talking to someone here in this room that said, used to be people had 1 car and, now everybody has a car for their, some for teenagers and their own and whatever. So I think it's worth looking at to see if there is, and I'll have this exact question about houses later, is if there's room to build, we can't demand that they all of a sudden cough up all this money and do it in 90 days. It's ridiculous. But if there is room to build more spots that will then, this is a logistics problem, right? This is not a lifestyle issue. It's a logistics problem. You have 100 units, you have 300 cars. So 200 cars have even best scenario. It's not about money. It's just like there are 200 of the cars, so they park in the nearest road. People on that road can't park when they get home at night, so they go to the next neighborhood. Next neighborhood then is short. I mean, it just goes on and on. So if you stop one of them, you're stopping something, right? And we can't make this so unaffordable to condo owners that they sit there going, what are you kidding me? Like, I can just cough up like a new assessment. But if we give a time frame, certainly for new things, we have different rules. So it might just be worth it, because even if you alleviate 1 unit of 100 units, that could be 100 cars. I mean, it may not solve everything, but well, this is logistics, which means every time you solve for 1 piece, you're releasing a lot of the stress on it. So I would look at condos and co-ops. I mean, you know, I don't know if Scarborough Manor is an issue and if they're like on a hill, if they could even add any spots at this point. But some of the condos may be able to add, it's totally the owners, it could be an assessment like when they redo whatever they do their roofs again, they do their landscaping again. I think it's worth looking at.
I think your point's well taken. The only thing that we sort of crash into when we start talking about adding the additional spaces on the properties, which is also something that we're asking the board to think about, is the impervious surface issue then,
Yeah.
right? Because then you have somebody who's like, yeah, no problem, I'll pave my whole lawn so I can park all my cars on my lawn.
Right,
Like,
so
wait a
right
minute.
now, we're talking about condos, and they're not gonna do that because then they have ugliness and they'll never be able to resell their condo, because now they're just living in,
Well, I think
in apartments in the Bronx that they all moved out of.
condos might not be the right word. I don't know what the ownership model is for the particular issue, for the particular properties that are creating the bulk of this issue.
The two you mentioned are both rental properties.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at the
Multifamily,
and I
yeah.
know I think they're probably more in the town than they're in the village, although I don't know that for a fact. Like condo unit complexes, which are managed by boards and management companies, is in people's control and they're unique. You change a code for those, you could do it specifically to them without affecting everybody else. So I think it's worth looking at. We
Mhm.
might gain, I don't know, 100 spots.
So sort of the last element of this in terms of what we've done so far, the clerk's office and the finance office have been working, in lockstep to try to better understand administratively how we could improve this process, not just for the office, but also for our clients, the people who are coming to get these passes. But something that we're hoping to move away from sooner than later is the board may recall a couple years ago, we moved from like dashboard placard municipal and commuter permits
Yeah.
to digital. So we would be hoping to do the same thing eventually for hardship, because right now it's a sticker that you put in your back window. Folks lose their sticker in the mail, then they get another sticker, then miraculously they find the sticker that they lost. Now there's two stickers. So it's there are places that we can tighten up the
Right.
system fairly easily by just introducing a little technology and common sense. So I don't want to belabor this because obviously this got shared with the board, and as the manager mentioned, this is the first of likely many conversations about this topic. But there's a couple short-term solutions that we'd like sort of to bring to top of mind, and then some long-term ones. The first short term is making additional changes to the application process, which we think may be helpful to have codified in the law itself. Right now, the way that the language is, and I think Stuart can back me up on this, I don't know that materially this has been changed since like the 1990s, maybe. We've made a couple changes here and there to the chapter itself. So if you look in general code, it looks like it was updated more recently than it was. But this specific language has not been addressed. And then speaking about specifically the qualification process, who qualifies, all that kind of stuff, the code is silent. I think that it's certainly something that we could do internally as a process, and the board would not need to get involved, but I think it would be helpful if the board could sort of help us to put together, what you think the qualifications are, what pieces of documentation are required, and who gets an exception. So that's sort of the first thing. So the other document that's linked in the agenda, I cutely called it a day in the life of a permit, is sort of what we foresee an ideal process as being going forward, which probably the greatest pivot from how folks are doing it today is that the landlord would apply on behalf of the tenants. We think this is a really, really strong suggestion. This actually came out of the finance office for a couple of reasons. Number one, it sort of controls the pool of people. People are less likely to get a permit for someplace that they're not actually living if it's the person on the deed who's getting the permission for them. We also have had some instances where folks have landlord signatures that prove to not actually be the landlord themselves. So having a more landlord focused and not tenant focused process, we think will help us to control this a little bit more. And then also speaking about the matching of documents. We sometimes make a lot of exceptions for, oh, well, this car's actually registered to my aunt who lives in Florida, but I'm driving it because we have the opportunity, here, I think you have 10 days in New York State to update your license. Project Greenlight has allowed a lot of folks who otherwise couldn't get a license now to get a license. So there's a lot of exceptions that we've made in the past that we likely should not continue to make. The second is introducing rules around when a hardship application may be denied due to delinquent fees or open permits of the property. This is a suggestion that can take many different forms, but basically for other processes that we have in the village, if you've basically been delinquent in paying your property taxes, or if you have open court cases against you, that is a reason that the village cannot move forward with doing you a solid and giving you permission to do something that you otherwise wouldn't. That does not exist in the hardship parking atmosphere. So if, for example, you're applying for 10 hardship parking passes, but you owe the village and the town $24,000 in back taxes, we don't have any opportunity to deny you those permits. So it's something that would probably require a little bit of finessing, but it's yet another lever we have to sort of not only influence people to pay their tax bills, but also to, get more of a touch with people and say, oh, while you're here, did you know that you're overdue for, X, Y, and Z? The next is consider code changes to clarify what constitutes a hardship. This is going to be the most complicated to fix, but the most simple to explain, which is the code as it stands right now, like we would have to deny everybody basically. Which is why for the past couple of years, we haven't been as rigorous in the inspections. I don't know how many people we've refused, but I don't think it's very many. Just out of virtue of the fact that the code is written in such a way that it's not really easy to interpret who should be denied and who should be approved.
Maddie, can I ask you, when you say inspections, what's being inspected?
So the way that the code language is worded now is basically like there are two conditions specific to the property where we can say someone is experiencing a hardship. And a hardship, again, basically means I have a car that I need to drive and there's no place for me to store it off the street overnight. One of them says, I could pull it up. One of them says something to the effect of there's no room on the property to put parking facilities. And that's, pretty clear, generally speaking. But what does that mean? Can you get one car in? But then there's the issue of front yard parking, right? We have things in our code that disallow front yard parking. So can they get a space in? Yeah, but it's in the front yard. Well, does that count or does it not count? We don't want there to be so much mystery in the process. We want to make it a little bit clearer for folks so that if they're denied, they understand why they're denied, but also for our staff to understand how they're meant to be qualifying people. Because right now it's pretty subjective. Hey, go out to 123 Main Street and say, do they have room to build parking on the property? A reasonable person, two reasonable people may disagree about whether that's possible or not. So I think we need a little bit more guidance from the board about how you'd like that discernment process to look ultimately. The other conditions, there are only 5 conditions that are considered to be a hardship. One is if you have a business vehicle that you need to take home, or if you're an emergency responder. I think those are probably fine, but we just need to tighten up the paperwork that we require in order to verify that that's the case. So really it's the conditions 1 and 2 about things that are specific to the property. I'll breeze through the long-term ones very quickly because they're, farther afield. But the first is digitizing the permit process. This is going to be super duper easy. We just need to get there. So as I mentioned, the municipal and commuter permits we're already doing through the handhelds. We require that the handhelds are going to have to be upfitted to be LPRs instead of just registration scan in order for this to work well for hardship. And basically it's what you guys have heard me blabbing on about for years. It'll be the LPR that's mounted onto the vehicle that'll be able to just drive slowly past the cars that are parked. You don't need very much room in between the cars to read the plates. So they can just go through and say, you have a permit, you have a permit, you have a permit, instead of dealing with the stickers.
Who does that?
Pardon me?
Who does
This
that?
would be the overnight parking enforcement officer. Right now, the handhelds that we use need to scan the registration, which is good for a parking lot, but at night you don't want to get out of the car and stop in front of every single car to scan the registration. So we need to wait until we have the LPR technology, which is probably about a year away. But that will also get us away from the sticker and all that kind of interchangeable philosophy. That can also sort of help us to define how we want to charge for the program. I know there's been many ideas over the years, some which have come out of the police department about every time your license plate gets pinged, you pay $1 for the night. And so if you're not parked on the street, you don't get charged. There's all kinds of creative ways that we can structure this. But first, it's sort of incumbent that we, be able to move to that next step technology wise. The next one is something that's come up. I know Stuart and I have talked about this quite a bit. Nelson Nygaard talked about this with us, a resident parking program. So I know a lot of the feedback that we get in the manager's office and what the board may also be getting is, well, can't there just be a way that I can get a permit to park on Croton Avenue? I live on Croton Avenue. There's all kinds of people parking on Croton Avenue that don't even live here. Unfortunately, there's not really any such mechanism. A resident parking program is something that we may be able to consider. I still feel very strongly that it doesn't really fit our needs. But basically what it would be is the examples that I gave. Our neighbors in Croton recently did this, and this is all through the Assemblywoman's office, so I was able to sort of pick their brain a little bit. You may remember a couple years ago, Croton and Portland were having big issues in the Croton Unique area. So remember, it's that little section where it goes down into the, is it county park or a state park? The folks were going down into the Croton River. And so basically they wanted this program enacted, which they needed to do through the state assembly in order that you would need to be a resident of that neighborhood to be able to park on the street there, because they were just being inundated with hundreds and hundreds of cars and they couldn't access their property. Similarly, Cold Spring just passed this again with the help of our assemblywoman to basically say, if you live in one of these places downtown, you can only park on the street if you have one of these permits. If you're someone who's here to go to the Cold Spring Diner or to, visit, leaf peeping, I think was the example that they gave, you'll have to park a couple blocks away. You can't park in front of my house. That really doesn't apply to here because we don't have a parking generator. The parking generator is us. We are they. So it's not like there's a huge influx of people coming from, to park at a hospital or something like that. It's all our residents who are trying to park here. We can keep sort of playing around with that and see if there's some sort of, neighborhood specific one that we can deploy. The next one is, I know this is something that's come up among this board a lot, code changes that talk about how people can use the parking areas that are on their property now. So for example, if we go to a house and someone says, I need 2 hardship parking permits, we say, well, you've got a 2-car garage. And they say, well, no, I keep my bikes in there. I don't know how we can really regulate that, but it is something that sort of begs further exploration. If people already have parking facilities on their property, how do we make sure that they're using them before they go back to the well and ask for more parking spaces at the expense of someone who might not have any? And then last but not least, consider capping the number of approved vehicles per address, which is not something we want to necessarily lead with, but perhaps as a final intervention, after all of these have been duly explored, that may be the next thing. So if you say, I live in a legal 3-family house, you get 2 cars per each unit, and then first 6 through the door, that's it. And if there's a 7th car, can't help you. So all options that we can think about, and this was sort of envisioned as being just sort of like you said, Mayor, like a whiteboard. Like here are all the things that all of the departments have come up with that we think can most easily affect this process in a positive way before we start considering solutions that are really going to put people out.
So this is great. The only thing I'm surprised wasn't up there, maybe it was, but maybe I didn't see it as clearly, is what Joe has said a number of times when he's spoken to us about parking, which is, it's not about the front parking. It's that there are, I'm not saying a lot, could be a lot, I have no idea. Let's call it 100 homes through the whole village. Okay, just as a round number, that's probably more than that, where they can have bigger driveways or where they've built fences. I mean, I drive by 3 houses every single day who've built a fence. The driveway continues, but they build a fence because they want whatever they want. It's their prerogative. It only allows for 2 cars. And every time they have a party, those cars are all over the street. It's not my neighborhood, but I drive by there. And it begs the question that Joe brought up is you can, and it's a side driveway, not in the front, that you can look and say you could do up to X number of feet of a driveway. I'm not even talking about how many folks are using their garages for storage and not for the cars. That's already up there. So you can have more, not going to the front, staying with the side. And that's another parameter of looking at how many permits we'll give you. Because if you can have, it doesn't matter whether it's a 3, 2, 1 family, whatever it is. If you can have 7 spots, but you've done it in a way that you can only fit 2 cars there, or you just haven't built a larger, you could lay down a larger driveway, which we will give you permits to do, because that's a change in the driveway. Because right now it's it fits 2 cars, but it could fit 6, because given the property size, you could do it. That would alleviate the people living, whether it's a single, double, triple, whatever, from parking on the street, giving more people to be able to park on the street who don't have space. So you could actually do a measurement as well as number of cars as a parameter. Since you're recommending that the landlords be the ones for the permit, they know how many people live in their homes. They know how many cars. They're the ones that have the driveways. And while driveways are not cheap to lay down, but if one exists, it's not an outrageous amount of money to continue a driveway if you have, and Joe has said this numerous times, that people can build more of a driveway without really causing a big difference, allowing more cars to be parked on that property. And that could be a way of, if we say it could fit 6, then landlord, you're getting 6. Or you can fit 6 there, you don't need, that's not a hardship. You can fit your cars on there.
I think, to your point, it's in there, but maybe in different language. So in the short-term solutions, when we talk about considering code changes to clarify what constitutes a hardship, those conditions 1 and 2 that I was sort of alluding to, that could certainly be an element of one of those conditions. If the property doesn't have a driveway right now, but could fit a drive or does have enough space
Right.
that meets these following criteria, I think what we would ask for would be something a little bit more prescriptive.
Right.
Instead of just asking our code enforcement officers to opine on whether, whether a car could be parked somewhere on the property. I mean, that's sort of a lot to ask. So having something that's a little bit more prescriptive,
Yep.
and we could work with Joe and with Paul's team about exactly what that language should look like and who's going to do that analysis. I don't think that's an issue, but we need to better understand how precise the board wants us to be in making these measurements.
Okay, so so it seems like it's sort of in there, just in different words. Okay, the garage thing and the garages. There are garages in some streets that I think people are living in actually, because you can actually see it from the street. So these are the kind of things that we're also going to have to address and how garages are used. We gave those folks on Route 9 went through a whole thing, rigmarole that they needed because they built another unit to have parking cut into the hill, and they've 2-car garage there that doesn't get used for cars. So I'm sort of rethinking that decision in 100 different ways every time I see it. There are some things I think we could have done differently had we thought about garages in the past also, not just the space. So I'm glad it's in there. All right, so you want from us tonight, it's an update, thank you. I think you got it on 3 pages, unbelievable. That's a miracle in of itself. Different neighborhoods, all the stuff has been discussed. So I think it's not new, but seeing it together is good. What would you like from us tonight?
I'm sorry, but I do have questions.
No, I know. No, there's no, I want to, first, I'm asking the question. What is it that you want from us tonight?
Sure.
We all have questions. I have no doubt about that.
So specifically with regards to the 3 short-term recommendations, the first 2 are things that we could prepare something and then bring it back to the board for your, tweaking around the edges. Do you like this element? Do you want to remove this? The third one, which is what constitutes a hardship, that's going to be something that I would suggest if the board is inclined to do any of these things or a version of any of these things, that's probably what's going to require more in-depth conversation with, again, maybe Paul's office with our building inspector. So for tonight, what would be helpful is just to get everybody's temperature on the short-term recommendations. Yes, no, or I need to see more to decide. That would be helpful.
Now, go ahead. We'll start with you and then we'll go to everybody else.
Thank you, Maddie. I know it's probably a lot of work, and I'm sure it was a lot of work. So I'm gonna start with
Can you keep
numbers.
that up? Can you?
I'm
keep
gonna
the- yeah.
I'm gonna start with numbers more or less, because it was very interesting to see that went down from 34,000 to 24,000 pretty much.
Wow. No.
No, I'm sorry.
100, no.
3,472 spaces to 2,437
Right.
spaces.
We can
And
post
then
this
you
to
have about
Yeah.
2,000 availability or sort of that they will sell. So let me ask you this, because you brought up different neighborhoods throughout our village. So based on the numbers, what are the clusters that you can actually say, you know what, this neighborhood here has 300, applications every year or has, do you have those numbers, those logistics
I can
itself?
look back to the entrance files. I think they were from summer of 22. So they're likely a little stale by this point.
Not
But
bad,
2
though.
that jump off the page at me automatically, and this is largely because there are only so many parking spaces available, period. Linden Avenue is a very, very big one, and sort of that neighborhood sort of spreads out, right? Because everything from pretty much the high school and then up the hill, you start to have that problem. The other one, interestingly, is near, I think it's called Cortland Living now, because it sort of then impacts the folks on Montgomery, the folks on Murray Lane. So that's, you know, sort of another area that we're seeing a lot of applications, again, from Portland Living through no fault of theirs, they need someplace to put their
So
car. Yeah,
let's
so
let's
those are
talk
two
about,
clusters
so
that stand out.
let's talk about those two neighborhoods more or less. So, and because you have those numbers, and Paul and his team, the DPW portion, have done an amazing job in regards to the streets and how many spaces are on Linden Avenue, or how many cars can fit on Linden Avenue from point A to point B, more or less, reducing the 20 feet each corner now. So based on that, has you guys seen well, obviously, if this was done in 2022, I'll be curious to see, has there been an increase from that time to now? And what the increase has been, if any?
Can handily get that information.
Yeah.
So this is a spreadsheet that's actually kept by the finance office. So every time someone makes an application, they put all the data in. Here's the person's first name, last name, the address that they say that they're attached to, what proof they provided to say that they're attached to that address, and then maybe one or two other, you know, arbitrary data fields.
Yeah.
So we can definitely go through and see how many are on Seneca Road, how many are on Linden Avenue. I mean, like that's an easy enough thing to count.
So I'll be curious to see that. And don't get me wrong, I think this is it's a lot of work, and there's different ways that I can see this going. I think the challenge right now is this, and this is more like towards the board. I would like to, you guys, we can talk about this. You guys can talk about this next year. I will be cautious to actually do maybe the short terms, maybe one or two of those.
Can you put those back up on the screen, the short-term ones?
But I'll be cautious to do any additional implementation until we actually see what happens with the rental registration process first. Because that is going to be more effective to realize if is an overflow of parking that is being coming out from different sectors of our village. You know, so I'd be curious to actually, you know what, we can do a lot of the stuff in here, but I will hold off on some of the stuff in regards to widening driveways, because that's going to affect a lot. I have a lot of questions just alone that portion, because if I'm doing anything in my driveway, I may trigger what you said, impervious surface, and that triggers me to go to planning board, and that triggers me to go into engineering, and that triggers me to get stormwater permits. So it becomes this whole massive project for a homeowner to gain 2 spots or maybe 1 spot. So I'll be very careful of making those changes until the rental registration process goes through. And that may take a year to analyze everything, because it depends on how many people actually do this. I'm all for the technology, by the way.
Same.
I think that will be fantastic, and that will be alleviate a lot of the stuff. And we've been talking about that for years.
And staffing too.
Yeah, exactly. So to me, I will take all this whole thing apart and just start picking little pieces here and there. But for me, I'll be, you know, again, the short term, maybe 1 or 2 items in there, but I will hold off until I actually see what happens with the rental registration part.
What about the piece on the landlord?
Yes,
Versus
I
you
agree. I
like
agree
that
with
one.
that. No, I do, because I think, look, and
So
I've
you
done
like
this
that one as
before.
well?
Yeah, I think I like that because, and I done this. I remember
Yeah.
one of the few
Yeah.
tenants, I was like, I actually, when Tom was here, one of the requirements was a notarized letter from the landlord. And I was like,
Interesting.
Tom, notarized letter? And I was like, it's me. He's like, it doesn't matter who it is. And yeah, I had to notarize a letter saying that those are the tenants. I mean, do I want to provide the lease information? And I'm not sure about that. I think more like, you know, the process, you're the landlord, you want to do the application, that's fine. There was a couple other ones that you had in the other memo in regards to, you know, the validation of the license, ticketing.
Yeah.
It's just becomes a lot, because I know this because it happened to unfortunately to my tenant. And Drew can talk about this, and the police level, Lieutenant Moriano, I should say, sorry. Because, you know, this amount of tickets, if you accumulate any tickets, any parking tickets, you cannot get an overnight parking or hardship parking. So that right there is a key element. And and one of the things that we were talking about that we have implemented on the building department level, if you want to do a permit, you have to close another permit, or you have to pay your taxes. For me, that portion, having that be part of the hardship, it'd be unfair for the tenant. Because the tenant is trying to get a permit, not the landlord. So that, to me, I will keep it totally separate. So I know that's sort of like in the long term.
Except technically now the landlord's applying, so it's the landlord. who's-
Well, then that's what I was thinking about that, you know, after when you were talking about that. But again, so it's a little bit, you know, but you applying in behalf of the tenant because we are, requiring now the landlord to do the application itself. So I'll be in favor of that. I will not be in favor of punishing the tenant at that point. So again, so for me is a lot of stuff. Technologies first. I like that part. I wish it would be in a way 2026, maybe sooner, 2025. No, yeah.
I mean, the lieutenant can tell you from, his perspective, and, I know we're working with a new special service or support services lieutenant now. The parking technology stuff has been enormously helpful with a lot of things, but it's just, it can't move as fast as we want.
My concern is always with what technology is if it's something breaks down, sure. And we had that problem before, where things fortunately do happen. So I'll be curious to see how will that, but regardless. But that's sort of my 2 cents for now, looking at what we have. I think this is a lot more work to be done in here. But again, for me, it will be to hold off, see what happens with the tenant registration, rental registration first, have that implements. Because at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff, guess where it falls? Falls on the shoulder of the building department. That's what it comes down to. And we're putting a lot of stuff on that department as is. So you guys will make a decision at some point. Again, my 2 cents will be just to hold off, try to do a small pieces of the short-term process, and then kind of take it from there. So, but it's a lot of work. So thank you.
It is a team effort for certain. I think there were
Yeah.
probably 15 people who were involved in this.
Bob?
Thank you.
Just a couple points. Number 2, introduce rules around when an HPP may be denied due to delinquent fees, open permits at then property, and I would add rental registry.
Yep.
To that. And then, I mean, everything else, I mean, it's a lot of work. And again, we gotta pick the pieces. What I would like to know is you did all the work on the streets that have the overnight parking. Do we have any data on potential streets that could be added to the parking?
We did not investigate that.
That's all I have.
And again, I neglected to share the spreadsheet, but we can add it to the agenda. The one that DPW worked on that lists, how many spots they estimated. I think it's really sort of illuminating. So I should have posted that as well, but we'll make sure that gets up also.
But I think you'll find streets that don't allow overnight parking illuminating too, to where we could add to that.
So, and not to you, but Paul, can I ask you a question? You have to come to them. Thank you. What determines a street to have parking on both sides?
Is it on?
Yeah.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So what determines for you the ability to have parking on both sides of the street?
I couldn't tell you. I could tell you that I don't think in my tenure we've ever added parking to a street. I'm sure it was derived some time ago based on some parameters for the certain areas in the neighborhood, same as which streets have tag parking permitted, which streets have alternate side, and which streets have no parking. I'm sure some of it was traffic control based, and engineering based. But I think, a large part of it was probably based on the community at the time. And I can say, it kind of plays into what Maddie's saying. It hasn't been a very dynamic program. It's been more static, and you could see why, because the more years go on, the more people get entrenched in the way it is, it's kind of tough to change because there's a lot of things that kind of develop all based on that. But that was a long answer to your question of me saying, I don't know.
Thank you.
I always thought it was the width of the street. I mean, there's 2 cars parked on both sides. You can't pass emergency, you can't have 2 cars, you can't have it 2 ways because,
I'm sure that informs it to some degree, and then also some of our streets I know have like a weight limit, and like there's, a couple
Yeah.
of different.
Yeah, there's streets that
Oh, New York State
can
has
have parking
regulations.
that don't. I mean, it's not all street width based. There's some very tight streets in the village of Boston that have parking on them that where maybe it shouldn't be. So there's a lot of parameters, some technical, but I think a lot of them was more of the logistics at the time of
Okay.
when they determined it.
Okay,
That's sort of been the legend that I've heard, by the way, since I started with the village, that, the folks at the time who were in charge of the program drove around the village at 3 o'clock in the morning and said, where are we seeing people park on the street? Okay, there's a lot of people parked on this street. That looks like a good street for the program. I mean, sort of like the cow paths in Boston, right? You see where the cows go, and then that's where we make the road.
Thank you, Maddie. A lot of work. As a general theme, I like all of the short-term moves, and I don't love a lot of the long-term ones. I recognize that these are very difficult things, but the digitized permit process, I like that. That's a definite winner. The resident parking program, I don't like, because to me, it for the reasons that you named, it doesn't seem like a good fit for us. The requiring demonstrating that you're using approved parking areas for parking and not storage, that also feels weird to me. I don't like it. And
so that's only if you're asking for permit, right? It's only if you're asking for parking.
It's only if you're
Nobody
asking for-
cares where you're
Right.
using things for, except if you're asking for parking on the street, but you're not using the parking on your property that's actually already there, I think was the way it works, right?
yeah, I get that. It's
I mean, you could still not like it, but
yeah,
I
I
just
still
want
hear
just
it.
want to be clear that
It's
it's not that we care whether you use your 2-car garage. We only care when
Right.
you come in and ask for parking permits and have 2-car garage that you're not using.
for sure. No, that makes sense.
That's the idea.
And the one that I'm still playing with is the capping the number of approved vehicles per address. It feels the hardest in some ways, because it seems very limiting, but I feel like we're ultimately gonna go there. And so that's kind of where I want to start, because I do feel like we're ultimately gonna go there. So I want to figure out how to make that work, but that's where my thoughts are.
If I may, just one thought on that. There's a million different ways to do that. So if in fact that's where we end up, our staff has had a lot of really creative ways on how to arrive at that number in a way that's equitable. So it's not just, well, how many people live in your house? That's how many you get. It could be, okay, you're in this zoning district that requires this many parking spaces. You get that divided by 2. There's a lot of methodology that could be employed to make sure that this is done in a fair way. Is it going to render a lot of people who currently, no holds barred, blank check, have a place to park? Yes, it is. To be without a place to park, but there's only so many places to put folks, and so it's certainly an option, but we can think about how to do it in a way that feels fair.
Yeah, thank you.
Nina?
We've heard stories about landlords charging people for spaces on the street. Right?
Yes.
This would help,
Yeah.
would this help, which you can't do, obviously. And would this help alleviate that if the landlords are making the application? I
Yeah.
just think I don't know how big a problem that is.
I have only heard about that happening the one time that I think everybody heard about it. I don't know
Okay.
that it's like a pervasive issue necessarily. I think it will help to have the landlord more involved in the process because it gives them more onus to be part of the process and what's happening on their property. So I think that's a home run. But I think another win that's sort of embedded in that is if we're revamping this program in any way, shape, or form, we're obviously going to have to do a lot of public engagement to get the word out, which is also, hey, this is the program. So if someone's charging you to park on the street, that doesn't belong to them. They can't sell you the Brooklyn Bridge. You gotta like go through us. So I think, to answer your question more directly, I don't know that necessarily is something we're going to be able to stop, but sort of increasing awareness of the program in a way that people can push back and say, well, wait a second, you don't own the street, may be something that's an outfall of doing this.
I know Linden, I drive all the time because I live near there and I know that they have a lot of issues. And there are houses on one side of the street that don't have parking because of the hill. And there's, and they have to park on the street and they live, ideally they should be able to do that. But sometimes even that's an issue. They live on the street and can't find a place to park. It would it'd be nice if there was a way to, deal with that, but that would be more of a resident parking situation or that.
I don't know that it's doable. I think if we weren't the kind of community that we're happy to be, which is a walkable one, we would be able to erect a parking lot every 10 feet. But that's not, I don't think, the community that we're striving for. We're striving for something that's more walkable, and that's many of these neighborhoods, right? You think about like near the high school, like that's why they're very desirable because they're near everything and you can get to your neighbor and you can get to a store. So it's not a bad problem to have globally. But I think what the mayor said, the first thing you said is that it's a logistics issue is spot on. Because it's very much an issue of limited resource and increasing demand, which is not in and of itself a bad thing, but it's a problem.
In the area of Linden, what other streets are available for overnight hardship parking?
I think it had been, I'll look at the spreadsheet. I think it had been considered to do, is it Clinton? But it's very steep. So there's
Eastern,
some
yeah.
parking lot on lower Clinton, like sort of near Ovac, but then the higher up you get, the more it's not allowed. I don't know off the top of my head. But most of the laterals, it's allowed. It's just the ones that go up where it's somewhat limited. But
The
again,
streets above the streets that are parallel to Linden as you go up the hill, like Prospect and those, Bellevue, and those are not hardship parking streets.
they are.
They are.
So I'm just looking now on the list, which again, I'm happy to share, but this is the list that DPW put together. Bellevue, you're allowed to park alternate side, so you switch nights. Clinton to Eastern, there are 25 spots on one side and 21 on the other for a whole street. So you think, oh, you got the whole street, but it's really only 20 something cars. What are some of the other ones that you just mentioned? Linden, you're only allowed to park on one side of Linden ever. It's not even alternate side. And Linden, on one side, or no, 54 parking spots. And then after, like towards the Dale Avenue side, it's 23. So for the whole length of Linden, you're only allowed to park on one side, but there's only 54 people who are allowed to do so. That's not a huge number. So it's a puzzle. It's a puzzle.
No. So, like Manny and Omar and everybody else, I think the short term, the technology, a lot of that, definite green light for me. I don't think anybody objects to that. I do think that the onus has to move from tenants to landlord. These are people that some live in the houses, some don't. Doesn't matter to me. It's your property. You got to clean the sidewalk in front of your house. You got to maintain the roof. You got to maintain, because the people are transient. Some might stay 10, 15 years, but some might stay 15 months. We can't codify things for such a high turnover of people in some places. Your kid comes back from college. You didn't expect them back. They work locally, so they got a car. But the landlord does control a lot, and the landlord is the one making the money on the property. They may make a lot of money, they make me a little money, but it's a business and you have a responsibility. The leases can also state that only 2 people can live in this unit and only those people can have cars. Or it could say nothing about that, but it's all in the control of the landlord. And a lot of what we get, and I'm not saying the control is easy, by the way, but there's something in the way we have to work for me that has to be consistent across the village. We can't make different rules for different people and for different anything. And it changes every 5 years or every 10 years. Whatever they did in the 1990s has been obsolete for at least 10 to 15 years already. But people who own, whether they live there or they've moved away or whatever it is, they have to be responsible for, so I like the idea that the landlord's responsible for it. I like the idea, that whole concept, and that they have to actually come in and do what they have to, whatever it is, once a year or whatever, because they've turned it into a business essentially, which is fine. That's okay. So I like that aspect in principle, that the onus move away from tenants. And I think landlords blame tenants for everything. They're the ones, I told them to take the garbage back, but they're taking it to the front. Okay, not interested. This is your building. You figure it out. If you have to be there like every week, then I would take the garbage out yourself. As far as I'm concerned, you've turned it into an income producing environment. You're responsible for it. The good and the bad of it. So I think that turning that over is on every level. I don't see a downside to it. And I think it also manage better, like who's there, who's in the units, and how the parking is used. Because we have heard stories from people, they're just stories. I don't know if it's a lot or a little, like I never know, where, the landlords have their family parking in the house and tell their tenants to go park somewhere else. And I don't think it's on Linden, but it's on, or on Ferris. I mean, we've heard people, and that's our job, is to listen to people. It's not data driven, it's story driven, where the landlords like keep because they have relatives or they live in a house next door. Okay, there's gotta be a way to curb. We're never gonna stop everything, but they're totally in control. The other pieces, I'm less worried than I think others might be as far as the long term, because no matter what we do is tough. I never thought about the condos and co-ops or the big rentals and revisiting and seeing not house by house, but if there's a way that they could add some parking now, maybe 20 spots. I mean, 10 spots. And it could be the rental as well that were built in the 60s and 70s, and see if there's anything we can do with that. That would be, I think, also, you look at this number, it's less than 3,000. And you say every 30 cars, it's like 1%. So 1% here, 1% there, maybe you bring it down 10% by just revisiting things in bulk. As Manny said, for a person who owns a house to go through all of that for 2 spots, but for a complex to go through it and get 30 spots possibly on some space, go through it once, and then you're done. And maybe there's ways we can help them with that. Maybe that may be another thing to look at that's medium term, and give them time to do it. So they're not all getting assessed like in day one, and give them time to do it. I think that's something to look at. So I think this is really, you're getting green light on some things, which you came in proposing very strongly. We also talked about pulling all of this out of the finance department at some point. There was a conversation. Where did that happen to go? I don't know.
I think the clerk's office is threatening to take it over, but
Oh,
they
no,
want it a
that
little bit
was-
more buttoned up first.
Oh, so that's not in your short or long term conversation of who manages it. That's just maybe not important enough to make
Correct.
the
So I think
list.
because the clerk's office is already embarking on commuter and muni for next year, using the new dashboard through
Mhm.
our vendor, they were sort of remiss to take on more at once. So it might be helpful to maybe consider this for like mid-year next year,
Okay.
if not later.
So
Okay.
sorry, in regards to that, I know technology has done a lot more for the clerk's department as well. So regardless of which way, who does the application process, I think it would be helpful for the applicant
Mm.
to be able to do it online.
Yes.
Because there are times, regardless if it's the
Yeah.
landlord, now you have to take half a day
Mhm.
to come in here and to do the paperwork. Even if it's something that needs to be notarized, that could be done in a weekend, you can scan it, you send it part of the email. I think if that gets done, I think it will help the process, payment online, or you can send a check, whatever the case may be. But I think that part of the technology, we should be looking into that, and I strongly recommend that that implementation happens within the 6 months, whenever the clerks, or even with the finance, if they stay with that.
Well, that's what we have now for the Muni and commuter, is that you do it online and you make payment online, right? So now it's all gonna be through FBS's portal. We used to have to do it in 2 pieces, but now it's really just one-stop shopping. You go online, you put in your driver. Pardon me? No.
No. But it's once or twice a year, so it's
Yeah.
much more, so it's 80% of the same people.
Mhm.
The other thing is because this is so many people involved, right? Somebody just bought a multifamily, they don't even live here, it's just really a business, right? They bought a multifamily, they have tenants, they're a landlord essentially, they're here, they're not here. What is the ramification for, lying, whether they do it online or come in, just like tenants now have, as it turns out, according to you, they've been giving signatures and stuff of non-existent landlords. So what happens in the reverse? So what's the accountability here?
I would defer to more brilliant minds.
I mean, even
I
if
don't
we
know.
move to the landlord model, what's the accountability for all of the I don't knows and, and all
I
of that?
think that one of the things that we talked about is as we start to do these things, and it's not just with this, it's with, excuse me, with some of the other codes too, what we find is that you want to encourage the good behavior. You
Right.
want to incentivize and reward. But I do think that you do have some recourse that you find out you're lying, you don't get any permits, there's things that we could do, or there's a fine attached or things like that. And I think we have to think through it a little bit more carefully. But I think those are things that as we start, and I think working on this somewhat incrementally when something hasn't been touched in a long time, and it's complicated, I think making these small steps and going forward will start to build momentum. And I think that we can more easily identify ways to mitigate the risk of people lying, or I don't want to say lying, manipulating the truth, I guess. I don't know. But just taking advantage of the situation, and then also look at ways we can come down and discourage that too. And some of this too, I think the public education on this stuff is so important, and that's something that we'll talk about too, because it's easy for people to feel like it was working for me, now it's not working for me. But when you put it in context that it may have been working for you, but unfortunately it's not working for mostly everybody else anymore. So let's take what's working for you and try to make sure it's working for everybody, educating people. And then I think that will help too in creating that atmosphere where people respect this as a quality of life issue as well. So I guess that's a long roundabout way of saying we want to work on things that make this more desirable for everybody so that they'll do it. But I think having some strict and very specific consequences if you don't, for those cases where somebody is really egregiously taking advantage, that we can figure out ways to do that as well.
So my concern, and it doesn't stop me from still going forward, is, you did something and now we won't give you a permit to park your car in the parking lot. Okay. I did something, I got away with it, and now I'm not getting away. Here, if there's no parking, it could be 5 families, could be 3 families. It's not being able, because of what the landlord did, if we move it to the landlord, because they misinformed, or they did something funky, or they need 20
Well,
spots.
fine might be a good idea.
A fine, no, not when you're making $20,000-$30,000 in rent roll a month on some of these multifamily homes. Like $100 isn't going to do anything. We've already been through this path. We can't keep going back to the fines. We do have to think in this creative way of thinking, what can be done, not punishing the tenants, right? Because The onus is on the landlord. So what can be done in the right magnitude that the good characters are living their life and the abusive characters of landlords, it's totally unprofitable for them to play the system. So loopholes is a bad word, frankly. Loopholes are things that occur because you didn't predict something that would happen innocently. And so now there is a hole somewhere. We've got to think, and we can't overthink because then we'll never get anything done, which is what's happened in past administrations that sat in our chairs. It's too much. Like, it's just too much.
Yeah, but
we have to
yeah,
think
but that's the
through it.
reason why I said, I think we should, because I think we're gonna be overlapping a lot of the stuff. And I think it's gonna be, is gonna be more complex. We're trying to simplify the process on the hardship portion. But we need to focus, for me, we need to focus on the rental registration first, because that's
that
gonna
might solve a lot of it.
eliminate a lot or
Yeah,
solve a
theoretically,
lot of
yeah.
it. Exactly, because we are, in a way, we're already doing this for the 3 families and up, sure. So now we're gonna concentrate that we know where you're seeing all the claims, or people have said that people are utilizing garages for living spaces or doing all this stuff they're not supposed to be doing, that we're gonna be concentrating on the 1 and 2 family homes.
Oh, I'm
And
not
so,
disagreeing with
but that's
you.
what I'm saying. So I think for me, again, I want to emphasize this. We should try that first, because that's going to start next year. And based on the data that you guys are going to be getting from the loan department and the staff, then you can start implementing additional stuff for
Yeah, I
this
think-
part. Yeah.
So Manny, I don't mean to interrupt you. My comment, while gave a real example, was really more to say to Maddie, to Stuart, to staff, to say, when you think about things, you always have to say, and what if somebody plays this game? What is the consequence of that? Doesn't matter what it is. If A, what happens to B? We focus on A and then we say, well, we'll find them. It doesn't work. So I'm sorry. It's like if A happens, really almost any topic, B, and this concept of fines and going to court, it's not working so great, because what we've learned is that the bad characters don't care. You have to actually care that it might cost you $1,000 to do something. So we want to make sure that in any of these topics, and I'm not suggesting on the short term, I'm not suggesting on anything specific. I think Maddie gets it. It's like, you got to start also thinking when we talk about things and we have creative solutions, the creative solution has to say, and if they play the game, what is going to be the accountability that will make it painful enough that they will not play?
Yeah.
And okay, I shouldn't use the
Yeah.
word lie, but frankly, that's really what we're talking
Mislead
about.
the information. And then I agree with that.
Just something,
Related to this?
yeah.
Just for clarity, so when you're saying that they're not doing the right thing, could you give an example, be specific?
Okay, so for me, just generally, we move this from tenant to landlord.
Right.
I need 7, whatever, I have 7 tenants, they give 7 tenants names, or
Yep.
and they're fake. Oh, well, they were here last month when I gave it, they moved out already, really? Like, when did that, like, we gotta think in terms of the consequences, because I think 90%, 95% are good characters. These are the rules. I get it. I'm looking across the street. That guy has 12 cars. I mean, literally, and I don't think it was Lyndon, so I don't want to keep pushing on that. We did receive an email. Somebody said there was a guy across the street who blocked up his drive. There are 12 cars there every single night. It's a 2-family home. There are 12 cars every single night. And the same 12 cars. And then there are like guests that come. So not a good character. But so the guy across the street complaining is because he's only got 1 car and can't find parking, okay? So my point is, when we think about anything, we can't just think fines will solve, right? Or this
Yeah.
or that. I'm not talking about it, but in parking, and it can't be like the parking at Metro North, because there, what's your big loss? You go find parking at another Metro North station. This involves families. This involves working people who, if the landlord did something funky, aren't going to be able to park their car at night, in the middle of a storm, rain, coming home from a midnight shift. Who wants that? I don't. So I want to make sure that the conversation includes, and what if? And
So
what can we put in place that doesn't harm people who are good characters, if you will, or fair players?
Yeah, the 3 ideas that come to mind for me, these are just ideas. Okay. Number 1 is
Excuse me.
the language that's coming to mind for me is like, when you were in school, you would get in trouble. They'd say like, it's gonna go on your permanent record. And then we heard like, oh, there is no permanent record. But what if there were like a record where if I'm a renter, I can go online and I can go to the village website or go to the clerk's office or whatever and say, have there been any demerits, if you will, against this landlord? Complaints, they messed up this thing, and you can actually look. And so that's something that will be permanently there, that if will potentially cost them, because it's like, hey, renters are seeing that like I have all these demarcations. Then you can have on the positive side, like people that are doing the right thing, that you can kind of, that by the very least you can do that. So like kind of a permanent record, whether it's kept online and visible that way, or just like go to the clerk's office, you can find the information. That's one. Two is having this registry of all the apartments or all the places where you have landlords, buildings that have landlords. And I can look it up. If I can say, hey, I live on Linden and my neighbor, are they supposed to have 12? I think they only have, how many do they have? And so I can look it up online, or I go to a clerk's office and say, how many passes does this house have? And it's like, it has 12. So then it creates an accountability system locally where nosy neighbors can say, hey, there's too many cars, and I can go look it up and I can do whatever, whether it's through a FOIL or through this, or there's a mechanism to be able to hold each other accountable. So it's not just on staff. That's two. And then three is the similar to the first idea of this kind of permanent record, but like we had this like presentation at one point where we were looking at parking of places where people were parking illegally, functionally, and that's like in a public meeting, public recognition of where people are not doing the right thing. I believe in positive reinforcement, but I think that there's a space for negative reinforcement of and where you talk about where does it hurt them? How can you hurt them in the wallet? The problem is that we have a housing shortage, and so there's there's more demand than there is supply. That just is what it is. But at the very least, if you can have them have some sort of public accountability, I'm thinking of I think of like a blotter or something like that, but something that makes it public. Like, here's someone that is being untruthful, then you can put names to who the bad characters are, or people that are not doing the right thing. Those are the ideas to throw.
Basically, data is very powerful, and as the generations move in, people of certain generations look for restaurants, places to vacation, rightfully or wrongfully, based on data and points to a restaurant and all that. Not every generation, because those numbers are frankly oftentimes bogus numbers, but it's not uncommon in the next 5 to 10 years. We're going to have entire couple to 3 generations that are going to be so data driven that that's what they're going to look at. And that would speak exactly to this, because that's what they're going to look at. And that's good for us if we have data. I mean, even the conversation about the e-bike, all kidding aside, when I asked for numbers, and having those numbers today is like speaks volumes. It just does. You could argue, where'd you get the numbers? Are they right? Sure. Okay. But generally speaking, I think it's a good way, to move in that direction and let people know. Now, whether they choose to call us because they don't want to get in trouble with their neighbor or they're this, okay, but at least they have the information. I think we're done, this isn't going to be an ongoing thing. This is not, so we can look at that. We spoke a lot of Linden. I feel very bad about it, because I feel like, for the people who live in Linden, we really don't win, because next topic's going to be that too. So we apologize. It was just an example. We could have used many, many, many streets, as people who live here know. But so we apologize if anybody is offended. Wasn't meant to be. It's just an example. Okay, I think you've gotten some green light on some things. Okay, fabulous. Karen?
So following up on our discussions, we've also been talking about traffic management in addition to parking. While not picking on Linden Avenue, the intersection of Linden and Croton does come up very often as an area where people are concerned about vehicular and pedestrian safety. A while back, our village engineer and Lieutenant Mayorano brought forth a proposal that had been worked on with our traffic consultants at Creighton Manning to make Linden Avenue one way, at least for part of the road. And we went back and forth. We did get some comments from the public. However, we do believe that this tends to be a remedy that makes a lot of sense for this area, despite the fact that nothing's ever perfect. But it is something that we are bringing back to the board and would like to be able to either move forward or put it to bed more permanently. At the time, I think the board was interested, wanted maybe a little bit more information, and now we're coming back to you to revive that discussion. And I'd like to turn it over to Paul Fraioli.
I have to say, we
and-
spent half an hour trying to figure out this,
Ah, the map.
the graphics, and now I'm gonna have to spend another half hour to understand the graphics, but okay.
So to take you through the graphics, we will now turn it over to our village engineer and Lieutenant Marion.
Thank you, Manager Dottori. So we are bringing this back. Thank you for the introduction of that. Nothing.
Yeah, you just have to turn on.
Okay. Nothing's changed from our last presentation with respect to what's being proposed in the design. But I think I will talk through this a little bit. Basically, what you're seeing there is a sign menu. That's something you would give a sign vendor and they would know what to purchase for you because it had, specifications on, where you want a two-sided one-way street, where you want to locate the no parking here at the corner, et cetera, et cetera. And essentially all this does is restricts, we'll look at it from with respect to the plan view that you see now. We'll say it restricts traffic from going right to left on Linden.
Tell
Versus
me again, I'm sorry, Paul, where's Croton on this?
Croton Avenue is in the left of your of the photo.
Right, okay,
right
that's
be-
it.
Right
Okay.
between the
That's what I
the
thought.
one-way signs,
And the
right.
pharmacy / rentals are right there where the arrow is right
Right.
now. Yeah, yeah, okay. Got it.
I will say this before we talk about the traffic flow and some police numbers. This segueing from our parking discussion that we just had, this actually adds, I believe, 4 spaces to this street if you knock it down to one way. There's no overnight parking permitted on this road, this section of Linden right now, presently. It's been petitioned by the and the board has been petitioned in the past to add that to our overnight inventory, but it never got any likes. But does add additional parking spaces to the road. A lot of our assessment was intrinsic. We drive up and down Croton Avenue every day. We know that that's problematic. I just had issue coming to the board meeting tonight from the operations center. It's even tougher when it's dark. It's
Yeah.
There's no topography on the. I'm sorry. There's no topography on this plan view that you see right now, but essentially you're coming from a lower elevation and up a hill, entering onto Croton Avenue. That's tough to do. We did restrict some of the parking in front of the pharmacy building, if you will, on Croton Avenue to allow for a better sight distance for those folks pulling out as they look west on Croton Avenue or to the right if you're pulling out. And we just think it's an overall solution. We're very cognizant that it's a cut through coming from Dale to get onto Croton Avenue, but there's other ways to get to Croton Avenue. And those ways will be vetted and we'll figure them out when they happen. I could tell you there hasn't really been brought to my attention, and I'm on the road around the clock in the intersection of Dale and Todd and Croton. There's not really a signal issue there, a traffic issue there. Of course, rush hour traffic is rush hour traffic in any community, but there's nothing really that's inappropriate there where there's something egregious that sticks out that said there's something wrong with that intersection. It can't afford any more cars. It's pedestrian safe. We have it's a controlled intersection for pedestrians as well. This intersection is not. It just has crosswalks with the signage there that we added all in all four directions. But it's still problematic. Croton Avenue approach, again, heading west or up on the view that you're looking at now, is also coming down an incline. So there's potentially speed issues there. It's heavily utilized by a lot of foot traffic, particularly during after school hours. There's a lot of children that walk
Yep.
down Linden from the high school, and they get to this entire northern portion of the village from the high school through this intersection. So again, some of the critique we got when we first presented this, that there wasn't really a full traffic study with volume, et cetera, but we're getting away from that. We're not hyper-focused on intersection function as much as safety. And I'm going to turn it over now to Lieutenant Myrano, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the historical safety concerns that the police have records for. And then we'll go back and I'll talk a little bit about the signage and what it means and why some of those signs are temporary in nature and how we would.
Okay, but
Yeah.
I think what's
Right.
missing here is I'd like to start with the recommendation. So as we're listening for data,
Okay.
so what is it that you guys are recommending? And then we can listen as
Okay. So
we hear things, what to
Understood.
listen for.
Understood and good point. The recommendation is to simply make Lower Linden Avenue, so the section of Linden Avenue that you see where Jamie's moving the character now down to
Keep going.
it's right there to its intersection with Glen Street and the rest of Linden Avenue. So that section that she just highlighted there, so the ones with the parking spaces in it, if you will, is proposed to be one way from Croton Avenue to Glen Street. Once you get onto Glen and or the rest of Linden Avenue, both of those roads are still proposed as
So the
two-way.
people coming down the hill, which is really a big use, sorry, people coming down the hill, stop,
Correct.
look for traffic on Croton, and then keep going straight. The people coming the other way are going to have to go around up to Dale or the other way to get to Croton Avenue if that's where they're trying to go.
Yeah, depending on where they're
Got
going,
it.
Croton Avenue, they
Okay.
go to a myriad of roads that are all.
Understood. I get that. What is the length of that whole thing? Is that like 100 yards? I don't know how many. It's not very long. I mean, it's not very big.
If that, maybe. Yeah,
Okay.
it's
All right.
about 300 or 400 feet. It's a good estimate.
Okay.
I can't read.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
I can, it's not long. I mean, we all go there a lot. Okay. All right, sir.
Okay, within the last 2 years data, we've had 38 accidents at this intersection. Of the 38, nearly half of them were right angle accidents, meaning that it was a car on Croton Avenue and a car on Linden Avenue that were intersecting. Nearly 75% of those, most of the accidents incurred a vehicle coming up Linden Avenue. Particularly during this time of the year, coming up from Lower Linden, crossing over Croton, going to Linden Avenue proper. This time of year, especially with the change in the angle, the sunlight inhibits it even more. You're coming up a hill, the cars from Croton Avenue are coming around the corner and going down a hill, so there's limited sight in all directions. And it's always just, since I've been here, I've been a cop here for 19 years now. There's always pretty bad accidents in that intersection. So this was kind of an idea that we came up with to try to mitigate that problem and make it more pedestrian safe and more vehicular safe.
That's all, that was over what period of time?
That was the last 2 years from current today, from today or from yesterday. I ran the data from yesterday. So basically all of 2023 and 2024 up until now, there's been 38 accidents at that intersection.
So not quite 2 years.
Yeah,
Yeah, not quite. I'm sorry.
and for context, how does that compare to other highly trafficked intersections in terms of accidents?
It's slightly above, but I wouldn't say it's, I wouldn't say it's way above, but it's a slight tick up from what we've gone with.
You live in that area, right?
I do.
Okay, so that'll be helpful. Well, so does actually, I think in some ways, so do you, right, Dana? Because your neighborhood is near the side of Linden.
Through that intersection a lot to Yeah.
Yeah, I
Linden.
mean, you're
Um,
up the
The
hill.
thing with Dale, I mean, if you can't go that way and you have to go to Dale, it's a really long light. Can you make the light shorter when you're coming?
No,
off
because
of-
it backs up.
You gotta sit there forever. That's why I go around that. No, it's a really long light. So I tend to go over to Linden
Yeah.
and go across that way, which is like boo-hoo. But, you know, I can, yeah, I mean, I always crawl through there very slowly, looking always. But since you put in the new signage, which was less than 2 years ago, right?
Yeah.
6 months, a year?
It was the beginning of this year.
Have there been any difference? Has it made any difference? The crosswalks and all that and,
Well, again, intrinsically, I think it's safer for pedestrians. They're in a designated crosswalk and there's signage there and there's advanced warning signage there. But, you know, the vehicle to vehicle, I don't, you know, you would think that might slow people down a little through that area, but the accidents are still happening. The accidents are still happening. Again, it's a tough intersection to approach. It's also tough if you're coming down from Upper Linden and you want to make it's easy to come down Linden Avenue, the hill, and make the right, and go on Croton Avenue. It's tough, though, to cross Croton Avenue in either direction on Linden Avenue. It's tough to do because your head's on a swivel and you're looking for cars and
It's limited sight.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's a tight area,
Yeah.
right? The limited sight distance, the grade. It's not even you gotta remember this, the speed limit's 30 miles an hour, right? You can put recommended speed, reduction. We do that in a few places in the village. Where we put,
Yeah.
Yellow signage with the black numbers. That's only a recommendation. In other words, we're familiar with this road in this area and we recommend that you slow down to 20 or 15. But, the speed limit is still 30. So if you approach that intersection doing the speed limit and someone's on Linden Avenue trying to pull out, it's tough.
have we thought about lowering the speed limit to 25 like other places are doing?
I think
Well, that
I've
makes-
heard it discussed in board meetings, and I don't know if it's this board.
We have discussed
Yeah.
it. and It was a no.
Yeah, but again, even if I would venture to say that the cars that go through that intersection are probably traveling 25, maybe even less. Pulling out is tough to do, regardless of the speed, because it's really a sight distance based on how your car is situated when you're on the hill like.
You
that.
make it a four-way stop like we did at Clinton?
We talked about that with the traffic engineer that helped us produce this one-way, and their initial assessment was this is probably a better way to go because the four-way stop will have collateral impact to the rest of Croton Avenue. If you're stopping people there's already traffic issues there with the
Mhm.
lights that we have now. A signal was totally out of their recommendation because they said that will make the traffic even worse with the signals that we do have on Croton now. So this was a solution that would compromise maybe some of the folks that are coming from that section that use Glen and the lower Linden to get up to Croton, which maybe isn't necessarily a bad thing because those are, it's a residential area. You got a lot of pedestrian foot traffic in that area. So you want to keep the commuting cars on the main thoroughfares that were kind of intended to commute, get away from cut throughs.
But I know that one resident was concerned it would push more traffic onto the residential streets somehow by making this one way, that would somehow,
Well,
he lives around there too.
again, Lower Linden and Glen are residential streets. So, it will push more traffic onto somebody else's residential street, obviously. But, we want to, spread the love. It's just, cars, when you're on the main arteries is where you want them to be. Cutting through is not really something that benefits anybody, I don't think.
Bob. Oh, Dana, are you done?
Yeah.
Bob? Comments?
I think it's great. I think it's long overdue. I still would like to see the yellow flashing lights for the crosswalks, but maybe some more lighting because it's dark down there at night. When you come down, don't get me wrong, when you first did it, came down with headlights, I was going to train, man, it lit up like Christmas. It's kind of faded out. Lights don't fade out. You know where I'm going.
I get it. You get acclimated and just, full disclosure, the conversation I had with trustee Fritchie, regarding the flashing beacons that can be actuated by a pedestrian. My feelings on that, and these are only my feelings, I'm not representing this as an engineering study or anything, is that it kind of gives an implied sense of security that if you hit the button, you can walk out into the middle of the street. It also gives, eventually you adapt to what you expect to see, and sometimes you come down that intersection and someone's going to say, well, there's a crosswalk there and I have the right of way. I don't have to push the button, or I didn't know there's a button to push and I'm going to walk out into the street. And a car who's looking for strobe lights and doesn't see them, instinct will say, oh, well, there's no flashing beacon, so I'm just going to go, because there's no one in the intersection. The signage with the crosswalk it's an institution. That's what people know. Crosswalk, stop. And it doesn't happen everywhere. You still have to be an aware pedestrian. I mean, Highland Avenue has crosswalks that are violated every single minute of every single day.
Yep.
But I get it. We can continue to talk about it.
We could bounce this around.
Yeah.
I would at least like the trial, or at least try that intersection, because again, there's a ton of them, Route 9.
Yeah.
Right? You just go down Elizabeth Street, it's another one, and we know where they're crossing at Hubble's Corner. They're crossing where there is no crosswalk. They come down Eastern and they play Frogger.
Yes.
But, I would at least like to see an attempt at least to do this intersection. That's all. I mean, and see how it works.
I will, again, I'll resurrect the conversation with a few of our sign vendors and see what that entails. I believe they make solar options, which is.
Yeah,
is something that-
they're solar, and I believe they have, the push the button thing that says, please wait. I mean, there's
Yeah.
all kinds of bells and whistles that go on.
Yep,
with it.
yep, yep.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Manny?
Besides the signings, that is sometimes very confusing the way it was just presented last time. I'm okay with that. I think the safety portion of our residents and people that drive by to those intersections is primarily our responsibility. So I'm okay with that. I'm glad to see you actually spoke to Bob in regards to those flashing lights, because I was the one who brought it up and the board was against it. So I'm glad that you changed your mind, maybe. But I think those, it's very dark. That area is very dark. I can tell you that. And when you drive Spring Street, there's a lot of dark spots in there, regardless of the LED lights. So at some point of time, my recommendation is to look through the village and to see how can improve that portion in there. And there are solar panels for those kind of situations. Yeah, I don't have anything else to add. I think.
So you think
people-
it's good or
Yeah, I
bad, or
think it's
you're
good.
neutral?
No, I
Okay,
think it's
so we have
good. I
two
think
board members. who are
You'll
definitely
get,
for it, yeah.
people get used to it, just like
Yeah.
people got used to the two-way street and Spring Street, so yeah.
Sort of.
Can I chime in with something else?
Yeah, we're
Uh,
going down that way.
One, so is the proposal to make it start with like a temporary deal? That's the way that I remember it last time we talked.
Mhm.
Hey, let's try it out. Let's do a trial. Let's see how it works. We'll do kind of public announcements about it. We'll gather feedback, and then we'll see, hey, if this is working, then we'll put in something more permanent. Is that the vision still?
My plan of attack would likely be to put in a permanent signage, cover it, start the public relations campaign with Jamie and hand flyers and just word of mouth in the area, possibly handing out something on a, somehow weekly period with a week-long period with the folks that we see driving through, maybe be at the stop sign with literature, and maybe some permanent signage announcing that what's about to take place. It's similar to what we did when we converted Spring Street to two-way from the Five Corners to the police station. We did the same thing. We put a big sign there. It was in English and Spanish. This is going to get changed to two-way, effective a certain date. We put all the permanent signs in place, which we can do here, bag them, and then we'll roll it out typically on an overnight. So the next morning when it happens, and then again, I'll let the lieutenant talk about it, but we'll probably have police cars there for, a week or so, just to make sure that people are doing what the new sign dictates they do.
Got it. Yeah, I see the logic of that. That makes a lot of sense. I think that what I'm kind of weighing in my mind is the feedback that we're going to get from folks kind of all throughout that area, balanced with the benefit. And I think that, 38 is a large number of accidents in that area. And I've seen them, and I've heard them because I'm within hearing distance of that. And so I've heard them and I've seen them. And so what I would love to do is I think that following through with that plan makes sense. And looking at the data, right? A year from now, whatever the period of time is to say, or 2 years from now, whatever, to say it was 38, now it's 12. That's huge. That's a large number of accidents. That's a big accident reduction. Whatever the pain is that you have to go through, then we can kind of problem solve in that way. But I think that leading with the data in whatever future time is going to be helpful. Because the last thing that I'll say is that on the street over here on Dale and the corner with Todd is the dance school is La Brea.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of people that are kind of like parking and moving around, and now that will increase as cars. They will go from Glen, make a right on Dale in order to go up, because they can't go up Linden, and so that will only kind of further congest that area. So that's just something that I don't know what to do or what there is, but that's something that comes to mind as a result of this.
Yep. So I originally was not in favor of it, but I'm not going to repeat everything everybody said. I see no other way is the problem here. I almost got hit just the other day because there were kids. There were a lot of kids. They're standing there trying to cross. People are just going through. In fact, I called Karen and said, we might need to have someone says it's the law. You have to stop. Nobody would stop, but I stopped. So the guy behind me didn't expect me to stop. Never mind, there were kids on 3 of the corners trying to like cross properly. Came inches from hitting me. A guy had to jump out of that pharmacy, stand in the intersection, literally stop cars so that there must have been 15 kids from school and a few from La Brea across, because their parents are actually in that parking lot, because then they can take off rather than pull in, because the weather is nice. In the winter, they pull right into La Brea. Remember, my kids went there. You've got that, you got the backup from the traffic light, you've got people coming in and out of all of these parking lots. At night, can't see anything. Forget if it's raining. I wasn't for it, but I actually just don't have another solution. And it's, well, I've never had an accident there. I'm just telling you, the other day, it was nobody stopping. They're going right through, and there are kids just waiting to cross. And the kids are so used to waiting that they're just standing there trying to get their foot on the street so that the cars are really going, I don't know if they're going more than 30, but 30 is fast there. They're supposed to come to a full stop, which is what I did, which is why I almost got hit. But it's the same in Route 9. People are not expecting it, so they don't stop. But here they should be expecting, because literally people put 4 signs on that intersection. Which I understand why Bob thinks it should even be louder, like more signage. But I just don't, last time I was not for this, but I've changed my mind because I don't see another solution, and I don't see it getting better. There's just more cars. The restaurant that's there is very busy. People are coming and going from the wine store, the restaurant, Seatown, coming and going. It's that weird one way, this way. There's just 100 blind spots, and it's nobody's fault. And I know it helped that near the pharmacy, you made the curb a little bit longer to help with that blind spot. Don't ever go back to the way it was, because I think that's been helpful. But with that incline, with the cabs and the taxis speeding through I see no other way to go here. I just don't see it. And I think that we just have to go forward with making it one way. And I think the one way your guys are recommending, Yeah, 38 sounds like a lot. That's accidents. There's probably 138 of like just misses.
A day, a day, a day.
Eh,
'Cause the
so-
worst is when you're going from right to left here, when you're going from Linden up, and there's cars that are backed up from the red light.
Yes.
And so you can't see really, you have to like kind of inch, and then hope that whatever car is coming this way isn't zooming so fast that it's gonna hit you.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I've been, since we've had the come, I mean, we all go there. I mean, we all drive by there. I just don't see another way right now. So I think this is a good recommendation. The fact that it adds 1% parking space or actually it's 8%, right? It's 40-something spaces, you're adding 4, it's almost 10%. It's on the way you do the data, but I mean, that's not the reason to do it. That's just, it's just an effect of it. It's not really the reason to do it. But it's nice to have 4 more spots. So I would say, let's move forward. I think everybody said, let's move forward because I don't think we have better solutions, but something has to be done. So I would say, let's go forward. But I do think this has to be put out there.
We need public
Facebook,
engagement.
police, Facebook. No, I don't think so. Do we, Stuart? This is not a,
It's not a resolution.
this is not a, yeah. Yeah,
Except today. Yes.
yeah, so. Yeah. Okay, but we are gonna have to let people know, and the police is gonna have to be there going, you'd get a ticket if you didn't do the, I mean, there are people who've lived here their whole life, and this is just the way they go, 2, 3, 4 times a day. You know, you got the people with the ballet kids are screaming, the parents are driving, they're used to it. It's a lot of activity there, lots and lots of movement going on there.
We can put our message board up. We can work with Jamie. to-
Oh, I was just gonna ask that thing that we did in Chilmark, that thing with the speed but you have, oh, that's right, you have an actual message
variable
board.
sign.
Yeah.
That reminds me of that other topic.
Trying to find a spot for it where we're not blocking the sidewalk. Yeah, I just don't want to block the sidewalk. I don't want to inhibit somebody walking and cause somebody to walk in the street and cause an accident, but I'm trying to find a spot for it. It's on my radar.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good
Very
night.
much. Thank
One
you
more
both.
item?
Yes, one more item. As you may remember, in 2019, we did an RFQ for a developer for 30 Water Street. This is probably going to be the last, hopefully, extension of the waterfront special use permit for this property, but it looks like it will be breaking ground within our lifetime. So I'm kidding, but I think this will likely be the last extension that we need at this point. But we will need another extension of the waterfront special use permit for 30 Water Street.
Correct. The current, which is the first extension, expires on November the 2nd. The developer is asking for 6 months. We're actually very hopeful that they'll be issued a building permit within weeks. There's just a few things that need to be done. But this way it would get them past that. What they're essentially looking is to go to, it would bring them to May of 2025. But all signs point that the permit will be issued before this year is out and probably before the month of November is out. Now, because all the paperwork is currently with the building department, but this is just to make sure that they don't, lose the date. So this way, we'd have a resolution if the board is okay next week, providing a 6-month extension of the planned waterfront special permit for the 30 Water Street development.
Questions, comments, thumbs up on this side, Manny? Folks, on this side? We're good? Okay,
Yeah.
I don't think there's a lot to discuss. I think we're good. I think it's a complicated transaction, more than I thought when we started this journey on the financial side. But live and learn. Okay. We do have executive
So do
session.
we have a motion to adjourn into executive session for matters of personnel.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Have a good night, ladies and gentlemen, 9:25. Oh, just so everybody here understands, next week, we're back in this room on Wednesday, okay? Not down, the courthouse, so let's show up here. Okay. Have a good night.